So whether you're saltwater fishing or freshwater fishing, your fish are probably, the fish you're after are probably predators. Freshwater, you know, you may be catfishing and they're going to be a scavenger, but in the saltwater, your fish are primarily going to be predators that you're going to be fishing for. So with that in mind, a predator fish doesn't necessarily want to exert a whole bunch of energy to catch his prey. He wants to be somewhere where he can sit there, exert as little amount of energy as he can, and still have the outcome. You know, he'll sit there in a pinch point or sit behind a current break. A lot of times what I'll do is, we got great springs in Florida, right? The springs in Central Florida are just phenomenal. And you can go down those springs and pay attention to what the fish are doing in the current, in behind the laydowns and stuff. And what you see them doing in that clear water in the springs, they're going to be doing in any flowing water. You know, they're going to, if there's a laydown, they're going to be sitting behind the laydown. So you want to cast in front of it, let it come over just naturally. You want to present your baits in a natural fashion whenever you're doing this. I like to fish into the tide. You know, if the tide's running at me, I want to cast into it and let it come back to me. Especially with trout, snook, tarpon, they're really keyed into, you know, what direction your bait is running. If you're casting across them, that doesn't look natural to them, they're going to ignore it. If you're casting behind them and bringing it over their head from behind, they're going to completely ignore it. But if you're casting at them and they're facing into the current, your bait's coming back with the current, you'll catch a fish just about every cast if you get on a school of trout or redfish or something. You know, they're keyed into that. And you can, if you do that, you can test out my theory. Cast opposite. Find some trout. Switch the direction you're casting at them, and the bite will shut off completely. So that's pretty much all fish do that. They're keyed into the current, and they'll face into the current. We have a huge current tidal swing in St. Augustine, Jacksonville as well. The farther south you get, not so much, but with the current we have, especially with these moons we've been having, the fish are really, you know, you look for current breaks, and they're going to be sitting in there. Look for rips around oyster beds, they're going to be sitting in there. I like moving water and transitions if I'm fishing for pretty much anything. You know, most of the fish are going to be on a transition. Here in St. Augustine, we got a lot of oyster beds, so there's a lot of transitions. So they could be sitting just randomly anywhere, but they're going to be sitting on a transition, usually down into the deeper water. You know, there's exceptions. Sheep's head, they're an exception. They're going to be on structure, and sometimes they may be in 18 inches of water, and they may be in 60 feet of water, and anywhere in between. It's just kind of where they want to be on that day. This morning I went out and I probably hit 25 docks, and I had 2 docks that were holding and caught what I needed, but you know, just real quickly hitting each dock. And so you know, with the different types of species, there's how many different types of species in Florida we got? 100 more. There's so many fish in Florida, and you can catch them all on the same, you know, doing the same things. I primarily throw 3 things, which is a topwater or a suspending twitch bait or a paddle tail, and I'll pretty much catch everything that swims in Florida on one of those 3 things. I really like topwater fishing, but see, there's, you know, with the different types of fish, you got your snook, and they're going to be, you know, we're in the northernmost reaches for them, but we've been having some good years. The last couple of years have been pretty good for snook around here. You're even getting them up in Jacksonville. I think I saw some come out of Fernandina even, which is, you know, pretty far north for them, but they're a target that we don't normally get to target. And to me, snook fishing and bass fishing are the exact same thing. You're looking for the structure that you would look for bass, if it's a down tree or a log pile or a rock, a riprap bank or a seawall. Those fish are going to be concentrated on that. There's a saying that 90% of your fish are in 10% of your water, and that's what they're talking about with that. Most predator fish are structure oriented. Flounder are an exception. They're structure oriented, but they'll just as likely be out on a mud flat as they will be sitting on a rock pile. So, you know, not all fish are that way, but in general, fish are structure dwellers. If you're fishing a pier and you're on this pier and you're casting as far off that pier as you can, unless there's a piece of structure out there that you know that you're casting at, you're probably just casting out on a mud flat and you're going to catch catfish and stingrays. Your best thing to do is just drop straight underneath you. Your fish are going to be right there on that structure. And that's, I don't care if you're fishing in Montana or you're fishing in Florida, they're going to be on structure, you know. And then if you're fishing rivers somewhere, you know, clear water streams, these fish are in the ripples, in the little current areas where the bait's getting washed through real fast, and they're tucked in behind the rock. You know, some kind of structure that's right there. They're tucked in there in that current break, just waiting for stuff to wash past. And that's the same thing that happens here. These fish just get on these ledges and get behind these the piles of rocks and get on the jetties, and just they tuck back into points where they can hide from the current but still be able to get their bait, and they'll pop out and grab it and go right back in. That's a lot of times you'll hook a fish and you feel him, you set the hook, and you feel him literally swim back in his hole that he came out of. Then you're kind of, you know, okay, now what do I do? A lot of times you can get on the other side of that fish and reverse pull him and try to pull him back out. But that's, you know, kind of depends on how big the hole is and several different factors in that. But you can, you know, just different species of fish do the same thing over and over and over and over and over. You know, it doesn't, people think that, you know, they stress themselves out about, they're thinking too much about, I need to catch a redfish, I need to catch a trout, I need to catch this, I need to catch that. Just go fish. You're going to catch what you need to catch. Just go fish. Go try it out. Part of kayak fishing is exploring, you know, trying new things, going new places, pushing back past where you saw your buddy in a boat last week, and man, I saw some redfish on the other side of that flat, but I couldn't get to it. I can. I'm gonna go there, you know. So just push yourself, keep on going. You know, don't just get in a routine where you're like, all right, I'm gonna go to this creek. I'm gonna chase a redfish today. That's what I do every day, and this is the spot that I've caught them in the past. Well, there's a ton of water here. You know, just because you caught a fish in Moultrie Creek yesterday doesn't mean you're going to catch a fish in Moultrie Creek today. You know, in fact, if I have a really good day one place, I won't go there the next day because you're not going to have the same results twice. But you know, if you're a freshwater guy, you know, there's plenty of opportunities here, and kayaking is just, you can stand up and pitch and flip and, you know, do all sorts of different stuff off a kayak that you can't do in a boat. You can in a boat, but in my opinion, you can position yourself a little bit better in a kayak. I don't really care if I get mine scraped up, so I'll get right up against the rocks, I'll get right up against the piling, I'll get, you know, just right up against something, and I fish parallel with most of my structure. I don't like to cast at it, I like to cast along it. Normally, you know, if I'm fishing a creek or a grass line or whatever, like I was talking about, the fish are going to be on a transition. So you're going to throw into if you're in a boat or whatever and you're fishing, you're throwing into the bank and you're bringing it back. You're going over that transition and your bait's in that strike zone for, you know, 8 or 10 feet out of your whole cast. Just on that transition, that's the only time you're in that strike zone. So you get parallel with it, cast down the bank, and you keep that bait in the strike zone the entire retrieve, all the way back to the boat. And you may have a fish hit right next to your boat, and you may have it hit on your extent of your cast. But you want to get positioning is key, especially when kayak fishing. No offense to the boaters here, a kayak fisherman and an outfisher boater in the same hole every day, because we're in a better position. You know, we can get shallow and fish deep. The boat has to stay deep enough to keep the boat in the water, you know. A lot of times I'm sitting in 3 or 4 inches of water, but I'm fishing in 15 feet of water. Where the boat's sitting in 15 feet of water and his bait's getting washed out and it's not having the fall. You got to think about where your bait's going to end up at the end of your drop. So if you want to be fishing a ledge, you don't want to throw it way out there and then have it fall way out. You want to have it, you know, about how deep the ledge is about how far out you want to cast. If it's a 15-foot deep ledge, you probably want to throw out maybe 20 feet and let it just fall back against that ledge. But you want your bait to be, you know, at the base of whatever structure you're fishing, if you're fishing live bait. Artificials, I'm moving the whole time. I'm fine. I'm looking at oyster beds with water running around them, you know, having moving water flow. I'm looking at birds. I'm looking at, you know, just anything that I see that's a little bit different than everything else, I kind of key in on. And if you see that, you know, cast a bait in there. If you don't get it, keep on working them. You know, just their fish aren't going to be in every single spot you try. You know, like this morning, like I said, I fished about 25 different docks and only 2 docks had fish on them. You know, and if, I probably could have caught some other fish on the other docks, but I was only staying on them for 5 minutes. You know, 5 minutes each. tops if I wasn't getting a strike. So I like to keep on moving. I don't want to just be stagnant in one spot and just be like, I know there's fish, I know there's fish, I know there's fish, and they just never come. There's fish all over. You don't get stuck on a certain spot, just explore. Take techniques that you've used elsewhere and had good luck with and use them in a new spot. I think in this area, I think a suspending twitch bait is, whether it's a soft one or a hard bait, something that'll suspend at about in between 2 and 4 feet is really, really good in this area because we have so much flats and so much shallow water. Jacksonville area, I haven't fished that up there a lot. I know there's a lot more deeper water up there. I don't really know what to tell you guys to do up there, but around here, a suspending bait, something that'll, even if it's under a popping cork's a deadly bait over the flats because it keeps your bait up off the bottom. It's not the most glamorous way to fish, and if your buddies are hardcore, they may make fun of you about using a popping cork, but I don't care, I'm out fishing them. I'm going to use what works. So, just don't get, and social media stuff, this stuff, people beating the heck out of different baits, for example, it's a good bait, it works, the Slam Shady. Everybody here probably has heard of the Slam Shady. It's a silver paddle tail, guys. There's really nothing that special about it. A Hackney bait, Fishbites, Ancient City, all those baits will perform just as well as that Slam Shady if you know how to use it. It's not the bait that does it, it's the fisherman and the understanding of how the fish are positioning and what you need to throw to do that. I think coming from the bass world to the saltwater world is a easier transition than going from the saltwater world to the bass world. Bass fishermen understand baits, they understand colors, they understand how baits move, how they work. A lot of saltwater guys, they throw out live bait and let the live bait do the work, just let it swim around, do its thing. There's absolutely nothing in the world wrong with that. It's a very effective way to catch fish. But if you do that in the saltwater, if you do that in the freshwater, you don't catch nothing. You catch some channel cats, So you've got to, you use artificials more in the saltwater and the freshwater than you do in the saltwater. Saltwater artificials, you'll catch a lot more good fish on artificials than you will crap fish. You catch, using live baits, you're going to catch a lot of byproduct that you don't want, pinfish and catfish and rays and just junk that you don't want. And artificials pretty much they're not going to take them out 100%, but they're going to take them out 98%. You'll still get an occasional sail cat that'll grab your live bait. You'll still get maybe a hard head, and a pinfish can be kind of aggressive on a mirror lure or something. But besides that, you're not just going to be catching a bunch of little snappers and all the smaller stuff that you don't want to catch. It's going to take out all those. You may not catch as many fish, or you may. I had days where you catch a fish every single cast on a paddle tail. And you throw a live bait out there and you don't even it doesn't even look at it. They're looking for something moving. They don't want it just sitting there in one spot, or even if it's drifting under a bobber or something. A lot of these fish want them moving. There's some days where I've been tarpon and snook especially, we've been out and these fish just want these baits just as fast ripped across the water. Just throw them out there and reel them back as fast as you can. Don't worry about action, don't worry about nothing. Just purely a reaction strike. And Sean Hackney and I have been doing pretty good on tarpon doing that. Just throw them out there and just ripping as fast as we can back through the lights. And they don't have time to think that's a mullet or that's this, they just see movement and they see something trying to get away and it's just their instinct and they hit it. And that's a lot of different fish will do that. Getting that reaction strike, a lot of your artificials that you're using is a reaction strike. Whenever you're using live bait, the fish you're presenting them with something that they're used to seeing, a mullet or shrimp. They know what they're eating. They're going in there and they take a bite of it, they go away. With the artificials, it's pretty much, not always, but probably 80% of the time a reaction strike. And so you're not so much, you're trying to imitate something that's wounded or dying, but you're not necessarily, you don't need to focus in on, I've got to make it look exactly right. I've got to, this has to be perfect. Just a lot of times I'll get a tune in my head and I'll just jig it to the beat of the song that's in my head, just random. It doesn't have to be anything, don't put too much into it. Just get it out there and just start jigging it any way, and you'll figure out a cadence that they're liking. Sometimes they're wanting a real fast cadence, sometimes as the water temperature drops, going to slow it down, in the dead of the winter, they're going to want that thing just stopped in front of them, just a twitch every 10 seconds, and they just have that thing just sitting there, just drifting in the current, and every once in a while, just come up like that. And it'll drive them crazy. I mean, they just can't hit it. But if you work it too fast in that cold water, you're not going to catch anything. They're not going to waste the energy to go chase it down. They're going to wait for something easier. Colder the water, the slower the fish, generally. Sheep's head are an exception. Colder the water, the better the fish. Kind of a bust, but the second half of the day made up for the first half of the day. But we had to switch tactics, switch gears, and do something completely different than what we originally set out to do. So, you can always have that in mind, that just because you set out for this doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to be. Monday I set out for sheep's head. I didn't like the conditions. I had a pretty nice day. It wasn't good sheep's head weather, so I put on a top water and ended up hitting some banks and catching some nice redfish. So, it works both ways. Some days are better for one species than other. Usually the worst conditions, like what we've had the last few days, are good for sheep's head and bad for everything else. The highest feeding time of pretty much most fish are going to be your first part of the morning and your last part of the evening, the low light conditions. That's, you'll catch fish throughout the day, but a lot of times I'm done fishing by 8 o'clock. By the time the sun's up, we're done, we've caught our fish, and it's time to go. But most of the time you'll catch them throughout the day, but especially if I'm targeting snook. If I'm targeting snook, I'm hitting that last hour of the day. Morning time, you'll catch a few, but I like that last hour of the day, right before dark, and then that last cast, right before you can't see where your bait's going to hit the water at. That's the cast that's going to catch your snook. They like that light condition where it's just right before dark, and they're looking up. They're normally in the low light conditions. They're looking up. They're not looking down at the bottom. They're waiting for something to swim over. They're looking for surface disturbance. So a top water or a something that runs in the upper water column is good. As it gets colder, though, these fish will push into the deep spots. Does everybody here know what a thermocline is? Yeah? Know what a thermocline is? Well, if you don't, thermocline is where your water temperature changes. You've got cold water, hot water, or vice versa. In the wintertime, your warm water's on the bottom. Cold water's on the top. In the wintertime, the fish move into somewhere they can find a thermocline. There's not a lot of thermocline in this part of Florida. There's a lot of shallow water. You need at least probably 15 to 20 foot of water to get to a thermocline here. So you find a thermocline in the wintertime, you're going to find fish, because they're going to be down below the thermocline, and you're going to find a lot of fish if you find them, in some of these creeks, because they just stack up in there. They winter in there all year long, or all winter long, and till the water temperature gets back up. And in the summertime, the thermocline switches, and so in the dead heat of the summertime, the cool water's on the bottom, the warm water's on the top, and the fish almost do the same thing. They'll go up into these creeks and get into these deeper waters to where the cooler water's on the bottom. So dead of winter, heat of summer, thermocline. This time of year, we have the transition. Spring, we have transition. Right now, our water temperature is just about perfect. Mid-60s, that is primo. So for the next few weeks, the fishing is going to be really good. As the water temperature drops, you'll get some more bluefish moving in, some of the more cold water fish, some weak fish moving in, and change your tactics a little bit. If the bluefish are out there, you probably want to throw hard baits, because they're just going to wreck your plastics, and they're kind of a pain in the butt. But I'll tell you this: they're the best smoked fish you can probably put on a smoker. Better than a kingfish, better than mullet, better than any other fish I've ever had. It's a bluefish. So throw them on a smoker if you do catch them. As the winter months progress, the weak fish will be moving in. We caught a couple the other night, but water temperature still needs to drop more. But those are a fun fish, especially if you're you got kids, or you're fairly new to fishing, because they're unregulated fish. They taste like trout, and you find a school of them. There's going to be 200 of them, 300 of them in the school. You can just, as fast as you can reel them in, pull them in. They like deep pockets, same kind of scenarios, trout-like transitions. Like get them a lot in Salt Run at the base of the jetties. But they're a fun little target. That's they're easy to catch and they're good to eat and they're unregulated. You can take little guys out and just rake them in and they'll love it for life. But there's just so many different, I get on my charters, people ask me, what are we going to fish for? I'm like, well, what do you want to fish for? There's so many different species in Florida, and if you want to target this species, go out and target, say sheepshead, go out and target sheepshead, but have a backup in case the sheepshead isn't on. Throw some artificials or some, if you want live bait, throw some shrimp or mullet or whatever. This time of year, you never know what you're going to get. Under a bridge sheepshead fishing, you may hook into a 50-inch redfish. In Jacksonville, it's no big deal. You get big redfish all day long, but here in St. Augustine, it's this time of year we get them. So, it's one of those things that you got to decide what you want to target, but just because you make that decision, doesn't mean that's the only fish you're going to catch. Saltwater there's so many different species and they all eat the same stuff. They all eat a silver mullet, silver fish. Anywhere in the world you fish at, there's going to be a silver bait fish in that water. Maybe a little one in the rivers and maybe a big one in the ocean, but there's going to be a silver bait fish in there. So that's a good starting point anywhere you fish at. If I'm fishing freshwater, I start something small. I'll take my ultralight out there just to see what all's in the lake or in the river or whatever, and I'll throw a little topwater plug, and that'll catch pretty much every species that's in there. It may not catch a big one of the species, but it's going to tell me what's in there. And then I can go back and say, okay, this lake has this in it. I'm going to go back and I'm going to hit it with bigger baits and see if I can get a bigger fish, and so on and so forth. And I do the same thing in the saltwater. A lot of times I'll start off throwing a little dart spin or something, and Patrick Sabile has a dart spin. It's a little tail spin. And they've got a little size. It's about an inch and a half long. And whenever those fish are keyed in on glass minnows or grass shrimp, that is a killer little bait. I mean, you're just talking a little crappie-sized jig, but you're catching snook and tarpon and trout and everything else that swims on it because they're keyed in on those little bitty baits. If they're keyed in on a 3-inch, the 3-inch mullet, the finger mullet, like are around so much right now, I'm throwing a 3-inch bait. I try to match the bait with what I see them eating. If I see them hitting shrimp, I'll throw a shrimp out. The other night, Sean and I were out fishing, and we were throwing, there was just tarpon and snook and just fish everywhere, just millions of betas. It was probably 2 weeks ago in the height of the mullet run, and we couldn't get them to hit anything. They just kept on hitting, kept on seeing stuff spraying. I told Sean, I said, Sean, I think they're hitting shrimp. And so I put on a Fishbites Fight Club shrimp, threw that thing out there, and I don't even think it hit the water. Straight down. And I'm like, yeah, they're hitting shrimp. And we ended up switching everything to shrimp and raking them in that night. And that was just an observation. We've been throwing for 20, 30 minutes, the mullet patterns, and we're seeing shrimp bust. So we're like, oh, let's switch over to shrimp. And that's what they were doing. So a lot of times if I'm fishing a new area, I'll go up along the banks. After I've seen fish blow up on the bank, I'll go up along the bank and see what they're hitting on. And I'll be like, okay, that's little bitty bait fish. I'm gonna throw a little bitty imitation. And sometimes a lot of times your paddle tails you buy for saltwater are minimum of 3 inches. A lot of them, I think Ancient City Outdoors has some that are 2-inch. But if they're hitting little bitty baits like that, you can cut cut the end of the paddle tail off and shorten it up. Just leave the paddle on there, but the body itself, you can shorten that body up. So if you want to, customize the size, if you see them hitting little bitty stuff and you don't have anything little bitty, just take one of those paddle tails and cut it in half and throw it in there. It doesn't have to be the exact size of what they're hitting, but it doesn't need to be 2 or 3 times the size of what they're hitting either. You need to keep it in that, in that range.
Disclaimer, I am not a fisheries biologist. I'm not a professional fisherman. I don't go out every day like Will. And he kind of did most of my job for me because he covered most of my talking points. But I got a couple things I wrote down here on my phone and about something that took me a long time to figure out. And it seemed a lot more complicated to me in the beginning, which is like solunar transit periods during the day, the transit of the moon across the earth, and then also the way pressure affects fish and their swim bladders in their bodies. So, go ahead and get my notes out here. So obviously, you know, the moon affects your tides, and that controls your water movement, which is going to bring the food to the fish and set them up in their staging areas where it's easier for you to find them rather than chasing them around. You know, when you got a full moon, you have a lot of activity at night because trout have big eyes. They can feed at night. It's pretty, you know, pretty self-explanatory. And so a couple of days after the full moon, you're not going to have very good natural feeding windows in the early morning with sunrise, sunset, because they've been gorging themselves all night. Sort of vice versa with a new moon, those natural feeding periods that occur in the low light conditions will be a little more productive than, say, you know, your middle lunar phases, you know, halfway through. So the way solar transit and lunar transit works during the day is it's measured in 4 phases. You've got rising, setting, overhead, and underfoot. And according to science, we have no idea how the fish can tell what the moon is doing. So, you know, take as much weight from this as you want. But the leading theory is that microorganisms, you know, your little plankton that your minnows feed on, base their movement off of what the moon is doing. And then that increases activity with fish. So you get major and minor transit periods. Your major is going to last for 2 hours, and it is when the moon is directly above or underfoot from you. And like I said, we have no idea of telling how the fish can know it's going on, but statistics have proven over time, and a bunch of people doing studies of, you know, smarter and greater men than me, compiling information that tells us that there is increased feeding in these times. And I thought it was a lot more scientific than, oh, it's just the moon's right overhead. And your minor periods is when it's coinciding with your reference longitude, so where you're standing, and it's at a 90-degree angle to you. And that determines your minor, which will be about an hour. And you can check all this on your Solunar Tide app. I use Tide is the app that I use. Tides for Fishing is also another good app. So onto that is pressure. And you got a question here?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, are you saying that a full moon leading up to a full moon, the fish are going to eat more, so after a full moon is not a good time to fish?
So not so much as a blanket statement, and obviously this isn't, you know, proven scientific fact, it's just theories of data compiled by smarter men, but they can feed at night, and trout have a lot of natural predators, so they feel safer in the evenings, and they'll be a lot more active. They got big eyes, and with that, the moon backlighting the bait and things against them, it's a lot easier for them to hunt from underneath at night. So, and without predators, they feel a lot more safe pushing up into shallower waters, up into your bays and things like that, whereas they'd normally be staging deeper, especially this time of year.
So after those periods, the fishing is not going to be as hot.
It will not, because they've been feeding in the evenings, and not so much because there's no food. It's you go out and you eat a giant steak, you know what I mean? And then some dude off say, hey, you want a hamburger? Probably not. You're full. You ain't got to exert energy. You've already filled yourself. So, and these are just ways to help you sort of maximize the efficiency of your time on the water more than rules to live by, I suppose.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of moon phases.
Yeah.
Is there a particular moon phase where they're going to get fired up beforehand?
So as far as trout go, 3 days leading up, and this is, I follow, it's a program called The Speckled Truth. They have a lot of data compiled on trout caught 27 inches up or 30 inches and up, and all that data is available for you on the internet to go dig through yourself. But that data set shows a significant increase in fish caught 3 to 4 days leading up to the full and new moon, but not so much correlation as to which one is better. So take of that as you will, but leading up to those major lunar periods seem to be more productive than.
So if I was to say, as a person who's had 1,000 things going on,
yeah,
a few days before a full moon or a new moon, it's a good time to get out.
It will increase your chances for sure, but it's one of those things that you want to add into the thing I'm going to get into next, which is pressure, and then also, you know, your wind direction is going to have some effect on it, and the other conditions that are more easily found, your tide and things like that. It's a combination of all of the things to add to your success rather than follow one as a rule of thumb and like a law.
And directly after a full moon or a new moon.
Not so much after a new moon will they not feed, because they can't feed as well at night because there's no backlit from the moon. So 2 or 3 days following a new moon is also quite productive in my experience and according to the data sets that I've looked at. Again, not a fisheries biologist, just a guy who's interested in trout. So
Not a deal breaker, but...
No, exactly. It's not a rule that you shouldn't go on outside moon phases. It'll just help you increase your chances.
But if you go fishing right after a full moon, your odds...
In my experience, it's tough.
stacked against you.
Yeah. So the other thing that can play a factor or will play a factor, especially in trout fishing, is your barometric pressure. And barometric pressure is the weight of the atmosphere all the way from the top of the atmosphere to the surface where you're standing. Fish have a swim bladder above their organs and below their spine that they use to regulate buoyancy, and it's also an organ that senses vibrations in the water. That is a gas-filled sac. So when there's more pressure in the air, there's more pressure on that gas in their swim bladder, basically makes them feel uncomfortable or bloated. And it's not so much where your pressure is sitting now. Say your normal pressure at sea level is 29.92 inches in mercury. Significant low is below 29.5 and significant high is above 30.5. The significant high and low is not as important as which way the pressure is trending. Say you've been at a 29. No, these are the actual numbers. So what's more important in my experience is trending downwards. And the rate at which it's trending is also important. If it's dropping quickly, that's going to fire them up. Their gas is less compressed, they're feeling less bloated, they're more inclined to feed. And those are just things that I always followed, the pressure and the sun and the moon and things like that, but I never really understood why I was doing it. And every time I try and look into it in a YouTube video, it's always the same information that doesn't actually get into why they do what they do. So I was just trying to give in layman's terms, because it's something that took me a long time to understand. But other than that, Will pretty much covered everything I was going to cover. But I was going to get into a couple of baits I like to throw in certain situations. I've got some weird ones that a lot of guys don't throw around here. When I'm fishing for trout, probably 90% of my strikes are reaction strikes. And then the other 10% is sight fishing in certain bodies of water in certain scenarios. But, so,
Actually, you need your lure dropping.
somewhat, it's more of like an instinctive strike, not so much that they're following it and seeing the lure, it's that a sharp or erratic action catches their eye and their predatory instinct tells them to kill it. So one of my favorites recently that I've been throwing, any jerkbait will work, but this is a Megabass Vision 110, and this is actually a custom paint job by Jeff Altman out in Pensacola. Guy does really good work. But these are $25 jerkbaits. You don't have to buy $25 jerkbaits. Some comparable ones would be like your, the Rapala Ripstop. I like that. I also like the Shadow Wrap 11 in like the 2 to 4 foot range. Anything fast rising, I really like. And this is one of those, when you're fishing for suspended fish sitting off of points, or like in a back eddy off of, say it's high tide and you've got a smaller creek mouth coming out into the main creek that you're fishing. Water's dumping out, you got bait coming out along the corners. It's something sort of, chuck it up into your smaller creek and fish the middle water column. Whereas, your redfish and your flounder are very bottom oriented. I knew this was going to happen.
You hurt yourself? I just realized what that was.
Anyway, trout more than likely are going to be suspended in the mid-water or closer to the bottom rather than fully hugging the bottom. This time of year it gets different with your temperature. But it's very effective for work in the middle and the top of the water column. You can move them real fast, slash them around, you can swim them. It's very versatile. One of the best lures, this was actually designed to fish the St. Johns River around us. This is the MirrOlure L30.
Put the mic in the stand.
Yeah, exactly. Another jerkbait, a little bit deeper depth profile. This I like to fish around like ripraps, rock walls, sea walls as well. Anywhere where you got a lot of current coinciding with either a natural structure point, but usually man-made, where you got a lot of water moving past and a lot of natural eddies. And obviously, like Will said, you always want to fish parallel to your structure. You don't want to cast over it. A lot of times with trout, they're not sitting directly on a bed or right in along the side of the bank of a creek where you would expect them. They'll be staged. Say this chair here is your oyster bar. They're sitting 10 feet off of it in a little lull down there at the bottom where the current is slower, and they're looking up to be able to pin bait between that structure and themselves. And when you come out and sit parallel to it and cast up, you're sitting right on top of the fish, and you're bringing your lure way above the strike zone back to yourself rather than digging it down to them.
I'm sorry to be the kid that keeps having questions. I see a lot of people say that the treble hooks cause them to miss hits, so they'll take them off and put a single hook on.
So, in my experience, you miss a lot more fish on inlines, but you'll hold them a lot better. The trebles pull, especially on trout in the summers. They got paper thin mouths. It's like catching a crappie. So imagine trying to put that treble hook through a piece of school paper and put a 7-pound trout shaking his head like mad on the end.
But your odds are better of actually hooking him.
Of sticking him, but at the end of the day...
But an inline
Yeah.
hook is going to hold him.
If you want more hookups, go trebles. If you want to hold, inlines are definitely the play. Unless you're fishing for snook, then I'd probably put inlines on everything.
Yeah.
So,
Because they're heavy.
yeah. Well, and also they just don't seem to get trebles very well. But, so this is the DW Twitch magic. I cannot keep my rods together. But, local, just a twitch bait, same column of water, same thing, just reaction strikes. Focus on your ambush points, like Will said, and boat positioning is so important, especially with a kayak. You can really get in anywhere you want to. So make sure you're fishing with the current. And I just have a cheap little, like a broomstick that I attach my poor man's power pole, and I'll wedge my kayak against the bank and stick that in against the current and just sit there, pick a couple casts, move up, move on. I don't like to commit to anything if there's not bait on a bed or on a creek mouth. Even if I've done well there in the past, I'll come in, I'll run and gun it twice, hit it with a paddle tail, hit it with a twitch bait or a topwater spook or something, and move on. On the flip side, if you're in an area where you know holds fish and you have bait and you've got proper wind conditions, it does pay to stay, and patience can be key. You know, it's all about having an eye for the water you're fishing and using something that you're confident in, most of all. Get as many casts as you possibly can with a lure that you feel confident on any cast you could catch a fish. And that'll make it a lot easier on yourself to not be changing around every 15 minutes or whatever. One last tactic I was going to get into is, I'm sure you guys have all experienced it up in the creeks here when it's getting cold, that you'll find schools of 25 redfish eating grass shrimp that are about this big, and you can throw everything in your box at them and they will not take it. You throw your regular sight fishing paddle tails and these spooks. It's a bass fishing tactic. It's called a net rig. And this is a 1/16 ounce jig head, and I've just got like a 2-inch zoom fluke on here. And the way this jig head works is it's going to stand straight up when it lands, and it makes a tiny impact on the water. It's very hard for them to, so when they're spooky, it's not going to push them off, especially when you're up in shallow water. I can pass it around if you guys want a story time. But
Really?
and I don't fish this like you would most lures.
I would never buy that or think to use
So,
it. You know what I mean?
you get up in a creek, if you got an oyster, say you got, and my specialty, like my comfort zone is 18 inches of water or less. If I'm fishing for redfish, I'm not interested in catching a redfish in more than 18 inches of water.
When I'm looking through
But-
my bag of tricks, I would never think to
I wouldn't have
try
thought
that.
about
So, and no, there's very few for saltwater small presentations. And my friend Jackson actually keyed me in onto this tactic. But you don't want to work the lure. You want to get in, get real quiet, and hunker down. and wait and watch him. You know, identify a fish, watch him move around along the bars or down a grass line, be real quiet and pick your shot. Try and lead him and drop it, you know, 15, 20 feet in front of him, and don't move it. Wait till he's about 2 feet from it and move it that far, and he's gonna crush it.
You're talking about
every time.
Like an artificial, like don't move it?
Yeah, don't move it, dead stick it. Throw it and let it land. And wait for him to get, you know, where you know he can see it.
Yeah.
And then scoot it about 3 inches. And he's gonna come get it every time. So, and that, it works really well in the winters, especially on days like this where you got real high pressure, real high sun, they're super spooky, they're looking out for predators, things like
I
that.
have an issue out here at
So,
this time.
yeah, so that's a really good, and I've only been doing that for a year or so, but when they won't eat anything, they'll eat that, and you'll weed through, you know, 8-inch trout and stuff throwing it, but, all right. So I guess I'll open it up to questions if anybody wants to ask me anything.
I'm just kidding.
All right.
Do you,
I guess-
I actually do got a question.
Yeah.
Do you ever use like the scent gel?
So I swear, I like ProCure. I use it a lot on my soft plastics. I don't put it on hard plastics as much because I feel like it wears off the enamel on it. But I like the ladyfish scent. But I've used the menhaden and the mullet. One of the places that I prefer to fish ladyfish is the primary forage for the
They've
large
got an
trout.
inshore.
So,
Like what is it called? It's just,
the inshore special or the blend or whatever.
yeah.
That stuff works. It all works. It's just, it's stink stick. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, I don't know how much difference between, you know, I put shrimp ProCure on 5-inch paddle tails and caught fish on it, so.
Earwax might work
Yeah,
just as
exactly.
well.
I mean, bass like garlic, so.
Really?
Yeah?
Freshwater bass like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Freshwater bass.
All right.
I never heard that.
Well, thanks for putting up with me, I guess. Sorry for rambling on. Well, yeah. Thank you.
Great, great.
If you guys got any questions, I'll be hanging around the rest of the day.
Your civil country dress lie is on to me, I must confess. 'Cause I always have to steal my kiss from you. I always have to steal my
Flounder and sheep's head. They're a hot topic right now.
Yep.
All right, guys.
Learn something.
Kill it. Don't drop the mic. So I need to know who's kayak number 7 and who's kayak number 9.
Hey everybody, my name is Chris McVeigh. I come from Keystone Heights, and I have been specifically right into it, like this. All right,
Even closer.
closer.
Honestly, you can't hear it.
All right, I have been specifically targeting flounder for a few months now, and my flounder game is exceptionally gotten much better, mostly because of a lot of tips that Para gives online. You just kind of follow his guidance, and it really does work. When targeting flounder, I generally like to go around and find places, especially in the grass flats, where there's a lot of tidal current. I like a lot of places that are like choke points, things that go in and out of creeks. A lot of mullet, a lot of bait, pogies, whatever, get pushed up through there. And a lot of people go out to places like Sisters Creek and whatnot, and they're like, okay, well, I've been out here fishing and fishing and fishing, and I can't find flounder nowhere. Well, it's like a maze. There's many creek openings and creek mouths and stuff like that to go fish from, and a lot of people don't know exactly which ones to target. I like to stay around the main portion of the actual river and then target the openings of those creeks from there, because that is where the bait is initially going to go in and out. You're going to have a lot of bait pushing back up into those back creeks, and fortunately, part of the bycatch is you also can get trout and redfish too. They like to hang around a lot of those creek openings and things like that. When it comes to choosing different baits and lures and stuff like that to use, I prefer to use a lot of the Fishbites paddle tails. They put off a lot of scent in the water. They leave a good scent trail, and sometimes when you're throwing, you don't know, okay, well, I didn't get a bite. Well, sometimes you have to throw 10 times in the same spot before a flounder decides to pick it up. They slowly start to creep up and follow where that scent's going, and they see it, and then they follow it and strike it. I actually posted a video on Facebook on an original article that I posted about targeting flounder that shows that flounder will not always strike when the lure first passes them. Sometimes they'll get up and follow it a little bit, they'll smell it, and they'll nose it a little bit, and then eventually they'll hit it. So sometimes you have to throw it over and over and over again before you get them to say, okay, I'm going to eat it this time because next time I'm going to miss it. Sometimes you have to fish slow. Sometimes you can fish fast. Sometimes you can drag it along the bottom, bump it a couple times, let it sit, bump it a couple times, let it sit. Sometimes you can rip it through the water, and they'll get up and they'll, like they were saying earlier, reaction strike. They'll say, okay, crap, I'm not going to get another chance again, and they hit it. I usually like to target them in tidal changes, usually the last of the outgoing, first of the incoming, or last of the incoming, first of the outgoing. I usually like to pick deeper water, so I usually like to do the last part of the incoming tide, first of the outgoing, because you get that nice arch there. So you can really get back into some of those creeks, some of those areas that you normally can't target when the water is low. Let's see. A lot of the times, a good place to start would be Google Maps. Look at Google Maps. If you're like, well, I don't know anywhere that would be great to target, look at Google Maps. Google Maps, 90% of the time that I see, shows areas at low tide. Most of the time it is low tide, so you can tell where the sandbars are, where the structure is, where the drop-offs are, because you can go out to even the main portion of the river and throw a paddle tail off the edge of the dock and slowly drag it and get flounder. Sometimes, let's see. Sorry, I'm kind of unprepared for this. Let's see.
Say yes, queen. Say ice cream. Say yes, queen.
Yeah, so most of the time when I'm using a method for targeting flounder, I like to do a twitch, pause, twitch, twitch method, which in turn gives the bait time to settle, but also gives it enough action to possibly get the attention of a flounder. One of the main rigs I like to use is the VMC spinner twist lock. It holds your baits pretty securely. You can fish it through a lot of structure, a lot of oyster beds. I get hung up all the time and I've yet to lose one. I think I've maybe lost one hook over the lifetime of using these things, and they usually rust out after trip number 10, or they get dull and you have to resharpen them and things of that nature. This coupled with a good paddle tail or something that produces a lot of scent is going to go a long way when it comes to getting strikes. A lot of people like to use jig heads. I personally don't, because jig heads tend to get caught up on a lot of things. I have lost probably an untold amount of money of jig heads just by snagging them on oyster bars and things of that nature. So definitely your hook selection is going to go a long way. Now when it comes to actually getting the flounder to your boat, once you've located a good spot and you know that place generally holds fish during the tidal changes, you need to be careful, because one of the biggest issues that I have, and a lot of people have, is losing the flounder at the boat. A lot of times you get them right there to the edge of your boat and they pop off. Getting a longer net, in my experience, has also helped out a great deal in actually being able to land the flounder, due to the fact that they are notorious for having mouths that just don't take hooks well. I usually wind up having to set the hook extremely hard in order to make sure that they do not pop off. Sometimes they hit it and they try to run with it, and you don't exactly get a good hook set, and then that's when you usually lose them by the boat side, because they'll follow it right up to the boat before they pop off. Let's see here. When you actually find a place on Google Maps that you want to actually go check out, one of the things that you should do is, as you approach the area, fish the approach. As you're bringing your kayak in, or your boat, or whatever you happen to be fishing from, fish the area approaching it, because the area that you think is good might be decent, but the area that you're about to park your kayak or your boat is probably going to be where the flounder may be, and you don't know. So what I usually like to do is fan cast in a complete 90-degree angle from one side to the other, and just keep slowly creeping my way up until I get to the point to where I want to anchor down, and that's usually where I'll pick up a flounder or two. And then when you actually push in, targeting areas like creeks, like I said, that pushing a lot of water is a good place to anchor up to and just keep casting, because the flounder will also push back out of the creek as well. If they're up in the smaller creeks and they're hitting like pods of bait fish that are running through there, they're going to come back out, and if you happen to be there, you'll more than likely get one or two of them. Let's see. But Another thing you have to understand is not every day is going to be a good day out there. Sometimes I've gone out and done really well on flounder, and sometimes I hit the same exact area, and I'll be lucky if I get one. So flounder can be quite hard to pick, because a lot of times people like to power fish. Throw, move, throw, move, throw, move, throw, move. Like Bear was showing, sometimes he's thrown in the same spot 10 times before he finally landed, you know, a 20+ inch stud and stuck it. So one of the biggest things that you have to remember when you're flounder fishing is also patience. You know, if it's a new area and you're not entirely sure of it, go ahead and fish it maybe a little bit faster. But moving slow has generally been the key that I have found to have the most success when actually catching them. So that is pretty much all I really got for you guys. I came very ill prepared today, so I'm gonna pass it over to Matt Allen and have him talk a little bit about some sheep's head.
Hey guys. Where can I start? Sheep's head fishing from a kayak.
It's loud to you, but not to them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they can't hear you.
Anyways, so is it good? Awesome. Obviously I'm very, very new at this. I'm scared to death, but I hear you. But anyways,
It's family.
what's that?
It's family.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know what you think, Laura.
Good.
What should I tell him, man?
Ask
I
questions.
need to know your secrets, Mark.
You know all.
Anyways, any questions any of you guys have, I could probably start with, and then we'll try to go from there.
What's your secret spot?
Man, that's a good question. Man, a lot of bridges produce, man. I mean, they really do.
Ain't no secret spot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they all produce. You know, try to get the. I like fishing a lot of the outgoing.
Right there.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you choose the piling and which side to tie up to?
What's
How
that?
do you choose which piling and which side?
Man, I usually try to tie up, like lately, up current on the piling up current, and just, you know, let out rope. You know, what I'll do, I got a rope with like a pole float. I cut it down to about right there, and put just like a clip on the end of it. I throw it up current, diagonal to the pylon. You want a long rope though, like. A lot of people underestimate how long you want the rope to be, but you want to give it time to get back to you, especially if you're in a kayak. Like, I mean, I paddle, so I need to give myself all the time I can, you know. And I'll tie it up and clip my hook on there, and then I'll tighten it up to about where 10 feet from the pylon, give me room to fish it. Tie it off in my cleat, and then just let out, work that side, and then if it doesn't produce, just move on down, man. And then that's the key too. If the pylon's not producing, don't waste your time on it. Give it a little, give it 5-10 minutes. If it ain't doing it, move on. Try something different. I've found a lot of luck on these bottom transitions too, to tell you the truth. You can fish a bridge, this and that, but like, it's like, yeah, fish this bridge, and what tide, outgoing, but you don't just pick pylons out of the whim. You want to find them. I like the ones at bottom transitions. This and that. Obviously, you want to look for the telltale signs. The barnacles, this and that. But. I really, really like those bottom transitions, especially, times like this when it's nasty weather, cold weather. It really helps out. As far as wind goes, I'll fish them in the wind too. You just sometimes it works to your advantage. It'll put you right where you need to be in the eddy. Like actually, as a matter of fact, I was fishing down here probably 4 weeks ago, and tried out the 312 bridge, and it was windy as hell then, but it really worked to my advantage. I got the paddle, they're real big pylons. I got to stick behind the pylon, and yeah, I didn't have to paddle, do nothing. It was kind of a nice fishing experience. It actually worked out in my favor, but that's as far as my fishing methods go, or I'm sorry, like the tackle goes. I use I use jig heads most of the time, as most of y'all know. But also, I really like using dropper rigs too. That's probably my second favorite. You know, especially if, you know, if it's the current's moving too fast, you're fishing real deep. You know, sometimes it's hard in a kayak. You know, but put you a 1-2 ounce dropper, you know, bank sinker on the bottom of it, and you know, single dropper anywhere. I usually do about 2 feet from the sinker, and you know, that can be productive, you know, too sometimes. You know, as far as bait goes, you know, fiddlers obviously are great bait. You know, try to get them, you know, when you can. You know, supports local businesses and stuff. But you know, don't get discouraged if you can't find them either. You know, you can always go scavenge, go find you some mud crabs, look under rocks at low tide, this and that. You know, I like the ones that have the green algae on them. I don't know. It just seems, in my experience, I know it's anecdotal, but I don't know, they always have a ton of mud crabs in my experience. But you know, that you know, you can always use mussels as well. But you know, mud crabs, sand fleas are fantastic. You know, I don't even really catch many of them. I haven't caught sand fleas in a while. I normally just buy them at that place off Monument. What is that place called? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah, Larry's place.
I don't know, but it's Larry's.
Yeah, it's not a, I don't know, I can't think of it, but it's like right there. But yeah, he has, you know, nice big sand fleas, you know, the ones that are almost too big for pompano fishing, and you know, they're really great for that. But yeah, as far as you know, their movement and stuff, you know, as you know, like it gets colder, they're gonna be moving offshore to breed. I mean, most of the summertime I fish, you know, downtown area. Try to, what's that? Oh, never mind. She's talking to a little boy. No, that's all good. Anyways, where was I getting at? Oh yeah, where I fish. You know, I like to fish downtown areas a lot in the summertime. And you know, as the weather starts cooling down, I'll try to move, you know, further out, you know, closer to the inlets, this and that. You know, because all those fish, you know, they're making their migration offshore, and it's a really slow one, you know. And so, you know, that's just kind of how I like to fish it. You know, like this time of year, you know, I'll fish, you know, Middle Cove Bridge is probably a good spot, you know, all around Browns, this and that, you know, all those bridges and whatnot around there. That's, you know, usually where I try to target. But, you know, later on I'll move, you know, to Nassau and Saw Pit and this and that. So, as far as fishing down here goes, you know, I don't do a whole lot of it. I just recently started down here, but, you know, the tactics kind of remain the same, you know, for the most part. You know, you look for those bottom transitions. Like I fished that bridge for the first time the other day, you know, and I'd never fished it before, but you know, I pulled up a map. I forget, just a map online, you know, St. John's River map, and I just looked, you know, found the bottom transitions on the map, and you know, tried to target those pylons first, and it paid off pretty well. You know, I got quite a few, you know, no real big ones, but you know, it was decent enough, you know, and I tried to, you know, hit those bottom transitions first on that outgoing, and it worked out nice. So, any questions, guys? Yes, sir.
What size leader do you like to use?
What's that?
Which leader do you like to use?
Oh, leader.
Do you like to use mono or fluoro?
Yeah. I use braid. You know, braid main. I use probably, I don't know, 20 pounds. I use lately. I've been, you know, Par kind of got me onto it. You know, real long fluoro leader, man. I use Seaworks, man. I love that stuff, and you know, I used to do maybe, you know, 2-3 feet, but lately just a 7-foot leader. I mean, I'm just dropping it straight down and, you know, vertical jigging, so it's not like I need to cast the distance or anything like that. It just gives you extra protection too, and you know, you break off, you've got plenty of leader to mess with, so it's gonna get used anyway, so it saves you some ties. But anything else, guys? Yeah, usually, but I'll fish the water column though, definitely. You know, I'll fish, you know, say I'm like 12, 15 foot of water, you know, I'll fish the bottom, you know, I'll start there and work my way up, you know, but, you know, I don't waste too much time on the pylon if it's not producing. I'll usually, you know, work it, you know, fish the bottom, and then I'll make one more, you know, fish around it one more time, about middle to middle bottom water column, and usually you can find something around there, you know, if they're biting there, if they're holding that pylon. So. What's that? Oh, the rod I'm using? Oh, I personally, I'm just using a 7-foot ugly stick, man. It's spinning setup. But you know, the shorter ones, man, I'm definitely gonna get something shorter here in the future, man. I like the ugly stick because I can beat it to death. You know, it takes a licking, especially you know how awkward I am. But yeah, but there's plenty. That toadfish rod's a great rod. I know a lot of guys use that. You know, my buddy Miles away fishing, he uses that a lot. You know, and yeah, great rod. I know a lot of guys are liking that. I know a couple guys use you know, G Loomis. I mean, Carr uses that. Another guy I've actually fished down in Port Orange with, he was using I want to say a 6-foot G Loomis as well. So, I mean, in a kayak, that 6-foot range is probably going to be the easiest to handle. But, you know, so it's definitely something I would aim for, 6.5. Anything else, guys? No? All right. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, buddy. The kill hook? I don't know, which one is that? Oh, the wide gap? Oh yeah, I use that for flounder, man. I'll put like a quarter blue crab on that. It fits on it perfectly. You talking about, yeah, the wide gap one? Yeah, I love those, man. I fish those wide gaps a lot. I mean, you throw a mullet or a mud minnow on it, man. And honestly, I use them more than I do the sheep's head jig heads, man. I really do. Like for all my not artificial live bait, and like I said, man, a quarter blue crab just that gap's just like perfect for it, man. It really, I'll have to show you sometime, man, but it really works for that. I was surprised.
Yeah, just a quick tip. Usually when I go for sheep's head, I usually like to start around 8 foot down on the pylon because I usually find them between 8 to 15 foot. As a quick tip for anybody, a lot of times people misjudge distance and don't realize exactly how far down they're dropping their jig head. You might be floating at a foot off the bottom, and they might be in 15 foot of water, and you really wanted to go 8 foot. An easy way to test that is where I use saw donkey jigs, bottom sweeper jigs, anything of that sort. I like to, if you're not entirely sure how far down it is, I like to run my jig head all the way back to the butt end of my rod because my rod is 7 foot long. After that, you click it, drop it another foot, and you're right where you want to be within that strike zone if that's where it's at. If you're not sure how deep the water is. If you have a fish finder or anything like that, obviously you're at a slight advantage because you can exactly tell how deep the water is. But if you're not exactly sure how deep the water is and you want to try to fish mid-water column or close to it, you could also use your rod, like I said, to measure exactly how much line you're dropping down into the water so that you get exactly where you want to be.